matter? I suppose it's more of a feeling question than anything. Do you feel like you matter? Because the story that we're going to look at today isn't, the first time you read it, doesn't really come across as being a story about people who don't matter. But it's really a story about people who don't matter, at least in the grand scheme of things. Even the town that they live in shows that they don't matter. It's a story about Mary and Martha and Lazarus, and they live in a town called Bethany. And Bethany means house of the poor. And Bethany is just a little tiny town. It's around the backside of a mountain from Jerusalem, just slightly over the hill. And Jerusalem is important to the Jews, but not to too many other people. In the same way that Charleston is important to West Virginia, and nobody else knows it's their capital. Look it up. So you have a couple of people in a poor village on the backside of a capital in a province that nobody cares about in the backwater of the Roman Empire. And that's the context of this story. And we will come back to that. So now I am taking I'm really going out on a limb here because I'm going to read all of John 11, 1 through 44. I timed it. It will take 3 minutes and 10 seconds. So settle in. I'll try and make it interesting or look for brunch plans. Now, a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sister sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." When he heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it's for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, "Let's go back to Judea." "But Rabbi," they said, "a short while ago the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you're going back?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light." After he said this, he went on to tell them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up." His disciples replied, "Lord, if he sleeps, he'll get better." Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Then Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, "Let's also go so we can die with him." On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she replied. "I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world." When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me. But I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." So this is a story about human pain and suffering. Suffering, as we all know, takes a lot of different forms. It might be the suffering that comes from an illness, a chronic disease. It might be the suffering that comes from a betrayal of a friendship or the breakdown of a relationship. It might be suffering that comes because of loneliness. There's all kinds of different ways that we can suffer. But this particular story is about the suffering of death. Because death kind of stands alone. Because death is so final. If your relationship is on the rocks, there's hope it can be repaired. If you're sick, there's hope that the medication or the treatment will work. If you're lonely, there's hope that you'll find community. But there's no hope for death because it's just final. And nothing reminds us more that things are broken than death and the grief that we feel. We just know that we are not made for that. It reminds us that things are not right. And death frames this story because the story is set in the larger context of the Gospel of John. This is a story about what Jesus cares about, the death of his friend Lazarus, but it's in the midst of a story about what Jesus cares about, which is keeping everybody from death and bringing new life to everyone. And here isn't what is readily apparent in the story, even though it is explicitly stated. Why does Jesus hesitate? I mean, it's just this odd phrase. He hears that Lazarus is sick, and it says Jesus loved him, so he stayed for 2 more days. Why doesn't Jesus go immediately? It's because Lazarus lives near Jerusalem, just around the corner. And when Jesus goes to Jerusalem, he will never leave again. The next time Jesus goes to Jerusalem, it will end in his death. That's why Thomas says, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." That Jesus is fully aware that all of the leaders are out to get him. And he also knows when he raises Lazarus from the dead, which he surely knows he is going to do, that is going to be the last straw. And in fact, it is. But Jesus goes and he does it anyway. So, what are some of the things that we can discover about where Jesus is when it hurts from this story? A couple of things that occurred to me. The first is that Jesus knows our pain. Jesus knows your pain. First of all, Jesus knows what suffering is like. It's kind of picky English, but I think it's important to make the distinction that God is in the empathy business, not just the sympathy business. Sympathy is when we feel badly for somebody else. It is a great emotion. Empathy is when we have been in their shoes and we know what it's like. Jesus knows how we suffer. Jesus knows our pain. There's this great song, What a Friend We Have in Jesus. One line is, Jesus knows our every weakness. And it's not in an academic sort of way. It's in a way that he has walked through it with us. Yeah, someone comes to tell him that Lazarus is sick and that Lazarus is dead, but he immediately knows what the issue is and what's going to happen. When Jesus heard this, he said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it's for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Jesus knows our pain because God is aware of us. And I think that's profound. Many of us live as if we are the center of the universe, but I think it really says something. That of the 7 billion people who are on the planet now, and however many people have ever lived, God knows you and knows that you exist and knows what is going on in your life. That's an amazing place to begin. Next, not only does Jesus know, but Jesus cares. 2 different times, Jesus comes across people grieving. "Lord," Martha said, "if you'd been here, my brother would not have died." When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died." What Jesus doesn't say after they tell him about their pain, Jesus doesn't say, "At least he's in a better place now." Jesus doesn't say, "God must have loved him more than you did." Jesus doesn't say, "I know you miss him, but I'm sure you wouldn't wish him back from heaven." Jesus doesn't say, everything happens for a reason, which are all things that I've heard people say at memorial services. Jesus doesn't say any of those things. Here's a brief little excursus. This is for free. You don't have to pay anything extra for it. When someone is grieving, all you need to say is, I'm so sorry, and then stop talking. That's enough. Because there's nothing else to say. There's nothing else you can say. All the person needs to know is that they're not alone. All the person needs to know is that you see them and that you are aware. I'm sorry. That's all you need to say, and remind them that you are present there. And that's exactly what Jesus does. Jesus just enters into their pain. When Jesus sees their pain, he doesn't come across with some platitude. He simply weeps. Because that's the most appropriate thing to do at the time. And most of us, know that verse because it's like, the answer to the question, what's the shortest verse in the Bible? Jesus weeps. But I think it's stunning to think that God cares enough about what's going on in Martha and Mary and Lazarus' life that he reacts at such an emotional level to it, even though he knows Lazarus is going to be raised from the dead. He's simply moved by their pain. Jesus weeps. Now, there are degrees of tears. There are, your eyes get a little bit moist and you need to wipe them. There's the one tear that slowly wends its way down your face in a very dramatic fashion. Then there's ugly crying. And that's what Jesus does. It's all passion, and there's no controlling it. God's posture that Jesus shows us is to weep with us. God's posture is to enter into our pain. Where is God when it's hurt? When it hurts, he's right there with us. So not only does Jesus know and Jesus care, but also Jesus helps. It's one thing to see and to know. It's another thing entirely to care. It takes another step. But it's still another thing to actually help. Because help requires getting personally involved and having the resources to make a difference. Jesus wades right into the middle of their pain. He sees it, he identifies with it, he cares about it, and then he offers them hope because he addresses their pain. And in raising Lazarus from the dead, this is the last miracle that Jesus does. This is the last of the signs in John. This is the last of the I am statements. That's one of the things that makes this a powerful story, that it all comes together right before the main event of Jesus' life. It comes together in the story of Lazarus, where Jesus shows one more time that even death cannot stop how God cares for us, and that God will not stop at anything to help us, no matter what cost he has to bear. And I think that underlines what Jesus is going to do on the cross, because when Jesus heals Lazarus, it costs Jesus something. It wasn't free. Now, will every person be raised from the dead? Sadly, no. I can't tell you how many times, particularly when I was younger, when my grandfather died, I knew that faith moved mountains. I knew that if I asked anything with enough faith that God would answer. And I can't tell you how many times I prayed with all of the faith that I could muster that God would raise him from the dead. And he's been dead 50 years and will remain that way until the last day. If anyone has ever told you that God will answer all of your prayers if you just have faith, you have my permission to punch them. God may not raise, please don't do that. That was hyperbole. It was to make a point. I may not say that at the second service when all the high school kids are here. I'll get notes from my friends on the school board. Did you say, and I'll deny it. See, where was I? God will not raise every person from the dead. In fact, that very rarely happens. But at the very least, what we get is God's peace that passes all understanding. What we get is the promise that his power is perfected in our weakness. Paul discovers this when he prays for his suffering to end. And in 2 Corinthians 12:9, he records this, but he, that's God, said to him, Paul, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. God cares. God helps. And sometimes God uses suffering. Does God cause suffering? No, I don't think so. But sometimes God uses it. God grows us through the challenges and the suffering that we have. It's an opportunity for Jesus to bring good out of the difficult circumstances of our life, to provide redemption, even when it's so hard. And he says that's what's going to happen to them. Mary and Martha are going to grow in their faith. They're going to get a deeper understanding of who God is. They will find out that God isn't just the God of the mountaintops, but God is the God of the valleys also. And no matter how deep the valley, no matter how dark the valley is, you are not alone in the valley because God is still present there. And they can learn that through this. And that's exactly what he prays for them to happen. He says in verse 15, "For your sake, I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe." Because seeing God in difficult situations helps us to be positioned for the challenges of the future. We're able to go, I saw God work in the past. God was with me during that challenge. He saw me through. Here's the next challenge. God was faithful in the past. I can trust that God will be faithful in the future. God sometimes uses the suffering in our lives to show us more of his character, and sometimes to even show us that we can handle more than we think we can. And in reality, for where most of us sit, a lot of the times what we call suffering is either just inconvenience or what we call it when we don't get what we want. But even then, God is present with us. So when God uses our suffering, I think it leads to the next point, and that is that Jesus asks for our trust. Jesus says to the people that are there, to Mary and Martha and just the Greek chorus, that Lazarus will live again. And what are his response? What are the responses he gets? But he can't live again. He's dead, Jesus. He can't live. If only you'd been here, then maybe he'd still be living. Lazarus will be raised from the dead. He'll live again. Well, yeah, theoretically, I believe on a faith level that is practically true, and God can do whatever he wants to do, but that probably isn't going to happen. And then there's the people who are just like, well, this isn't going to work. And in fact, I mean, it's a pretty big ask. Do you believe that God can do this? That's a pretty big ask. And lots of times our response is, I've never seen God work that way. Or this is not how it works. Or that's impossible. Miracles might have happened 2,000 years ago. Miracles might happen in tribes that have not been reached by the Western world. It doesn't happen that way here. I don't see any way through my current problems because I don't know how God can fix it. It's a pretty big ask. But Jesus asks, and verse 41, I think, is really important. He says, let's do this thing, and they're like, it's not going to work, and it's going to smell bad. He says, are we going to do this thing or not? So, in biblical understatement, in verse 41, so they took the stone away. They went ahead, all right, Jesus, we will participate. We will go to the end of our faith. We still don't think this thing is going to work, but we're on board. If you want to prove us wrong, Jesus, go ahead and do this. And then I love how verse 42 follows on its heels. God, this is Jesus, we get to overhear the stage whisper thing. Jesus looks up and goes, I know you know that I know, and I know you know that I know, but I'm saying this for them. And I love that. He says it so that everyone will believe that God can actually do it. And then God does it. And if you think about what is going to happen in their lives in the next week, I mean, Jesus is going to go pretty much immediately to the triumphal entrance, and then he's going to die. They're going to remember Lazarus. They're going to remember the pain, and they're going to remember that God can do anything, and that's going to change their future. And then the last point that I want to make is that Jesus works through us. Where is Jesus when it hurts? Jesus is with us. Where is Jesus when other people are hurting? Jesus works through us. Now, there are the life and death issues that we have been talking about. that Jesus works in our lives, and Jesus can use us when we come across other people that are dealing with suffering. But there are smaller issues too. Like, I've been thinking a lot about the price of eggs. I mean, it is ridiculous how expensive eggs are. But what Megan and I do is we complain about it. And then we buy them anyway. And then we just kind of eat less eggs. I mean, I can't tell you how many days I've gone, do I really need an omelet, or would cereal be all right this morning? But there are other families that just can't buy eggs anymore. Or butter. Butter's like $7. Does Jesus care that families can't feed their kids? Does Jesus show up for them? More and more, I feel like we live in a culture where the only people that matter are the rich and the famous. We'll see that tonight at the Oscars. The people who can buy influence, the people are successful. Those people matter. Might makes right. The victory is what matters. Strong people win. People like you and me, it's where I began. Do we really matter? Who cares about the people that are going under? So this is completely the wrong season for this, but I want to show you a short clip from A Christmas Carol.
Mr. Scrooge, I presume.
Indeed you do, sir.
You don't know us.
Nor do I wish to.
My name is Poole, and this is Mr. Hackett.
Excellent. Now, if you'll allow me to pass.
Let me explain, sir. At this festive season of the year, it seems desirable that those of us with means should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute who suffer greatly at this time.
Provision. Are you seeking money from me then?
Many thousands are in want of common necessaries. Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comforts.
Are there no prisons?
Plenty of prisons.
The workhouses, they're still in operation?
They are. I wish I could say they were not.
The treadmill, the poorhouses, still in full vigor?
All very busy, sir.
I was afraid from what you said that something had stopped them in full force.
A few of us are endeavoring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink, and food and warmth.
What can we put you down for, sir?
Nothing.
You wish to be anonymous?
I wish to be left alone. Since you asked me what I wish, gentlemen, that is my answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. My taxes help to support the public institutions which I have mentioned, and they cost enough. Those who are badly off must go there.
Many can't go there, and many would rather die.
If they would rather die, perhaps they had better do so, and decrease the surplus population.
Surely you don't mean that, sir.
With all my heart. Now, if you will go about your business, gentlemen, and allow me to go about mine.
I've always been haunted by that scene. I have mine, and I don't care about the suffering of others. And that's why the context of this story is so powerful, because Mary and Martha and Lazarus are not powerful people. They're not rich people. These are people that don't matter much at all, except to God. And think about some of the songs that we sing that remind us of how God helps and who God helps. All the poor and powerless, all the lost and lonely, all who feel unworthy, all who hurt with nothing left. Blessed are the wounded ones in mourning, brave enough to show the Lord their scars. Blessed are the hurts that are not hidden, open to the healing touch of God. That's what we believe. That's the God that we've experienced. And most days, we are the only Jesus that people will see. We're the only ones who can know, who can care, and can help. And it might require money. It might require time. It might be sharing food. It might be giving clothing. It might be sitting and listening to someone who's lost a loved one and sees that everyone has gone back to their lives, and they don't have the same life to go back to. When Rusty reads to kids, when Jeannie distributes coats, when Doug builds a cabin, when Sylvia brings flowers, when you cook food, when you get a teenager off the street with the donation that you made at Christmas, when you're at school and you sit next to the kid who's being bullied, when you invite somebody out for coffee that isn't one of your buddies, that's Jesus caring through you. That's Jesus helping through you. And it's all costly, but we do it because we have the example of Jesus who went to his friend Lazarus, knowing that Lazarus would live and he would die. We do it because that's the way that Jesus enters into our lives. So let me ask you 3 questions. Number 1, what pain or hurt are you carrying that you need to experience the presence of Jesus in? Number 2, who will God lead across your path this week that you can express care and concern for in Jesus' name? And the 3rd, what are you convinced that God can't or won't do?
Hi, thanks for watching. The people of Harbor Covenant Church really want you to know the love that God has for you, want to grow with you in faith, and want to serve alongside you, not only to help others do the same, but also to make our families and our communities better. If that sounds like something that you can get on board with, then like, follow, and drop us a comment in the video. Watch some more videos on our channel or come visit us on Sunday. You can find out more about Harbor Covenant Church at harborcov.church.